What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with Absolute Superman. And I cannot wait until Absolute Superman fights the OG Superman in DCKO. I cannot wait until that fight comes around. So, what this does is this picks up in the aftermath of the last video that we did, which was basically Lazarus Corp invading Smallville. And they take no prisoners and no quarter. It's pretty extreme. So this opens up 6 weeks ago, which is when it all starts. We're literally doing a 6-week time skip. And Lois Lane is the one giving us this monologue. She says, Lazarus rolled its tanks down the main street, past the empty storefronts, the 90-year-old feed store, and the Smallville Guild of Quilters. Attack helicopters swarmed like flies at the state fairgrounds, toppling the year's prize butter sculpture of Amelia Earnhardt, a beloved Kansas native and my own personal idol since I was 5. The Kansans stood their ground, armed to the teeth, like they did during the border wars of the 1850s when it was Missouri bushwhackers and Confederate guerrillas come to sack their towns. They were farmers and the sons of salt miners, the daughters of free staters and Dodge City gunfighters. Ad astra per aspera was their state motto. Across 9 million light years, rocketed alone from his exploded alien homeworld, his flesh sizzling with the power of a fallen star. Of course, he would find his way here, to these sun-drenched prairies and sunflower fields. Ad astra per aspera, to the stars through difficulties. So began the Battle of Kansas. It's one hell of a way to open this story. Dude, say what you want to about Jason Aaron, man. That guy can write comics. It's phenomenal. But the bigger takeaway from this, right? What you're kind of looking at here is small town guy versus great big huge mega corrupt corporation. That's kind of what you're seeing. But the beauty in all of this is going to come through Superman. And there's kind of a maybe silver lining that Jason Aaron's hitting at here. And so what you end up doing is you pick up with Superman himself, where he says, Saul, I need you to use your every last crystal to fortify Smallville. Now, of course, Saul responds and he says, I can do this, but it will mean defying my primary objective as installed by your parents. It will mean leaving you without my protection while you're still weakened and recovering from your ordeal at the hands of Brainiac and Ra's al Ghul. But the response to Superman, he actually cuts him off, and he just says, my parents are dead, Smallville is not. Not if I can help it. Override all existing L protocols. You are Smallville's cape now. I can take care of myself. And that's where Saul just says, as you wish, Kal-El. Now, it's a gamble. It's a risk that he's taking here, right? I mean, keep in mind, Absolute Superman does have the ability to metabolize solar radiation. But if there's any one thing that we've learned about the huge differences between Absolute Superman and the main Superman in the DC universe, Absolute Superman is younger and more reckless. He doesn't really know how to conserve his energy stores the same way that the OG Superman does, meaning he'll burn through his power if he's not careful. And that's exactly what starts to happen. That Lois kind of addresses everybody and says Peacemaker armor's weakest at its knees. Jimmy Olsen says aim for the tail rotors on the choppers. And that's where everybody else just kind of okay, for Smallville. And that's where Lois picks back up again. She says, first thing Lazarus did was blow up the phone towers and jam the internet. By the time the Peacemakers parachuted onto the Jayhawks community baseball field, blockades had been established on every highway and hiking trail in and out of town. The prairie would soon be mined for miles in every direction. The Arkansas River patrolled by Reaper drones. Now, in case you guys think that Jason Aaron's crazy, Jason Aaron actually adds in. He says, and around here, that's Arkansas, not the Arkansas. They're pretty insistent on that. So he's kind of no, I didn't mistype. Right? It is, I guess, the Arkansas River, but the Arkansas River. So yeah, we're not wrong here. But again, that's where she says, cornfields, cattle ranches, and the crop dusters at the municipal airport were carpet bombed into oblivion by Lazarus fighter jets. By midday, power had been cut to all of Smallville and its surrounding farms. This was more than just a battle. The world's most powerful corporation with a market cap of $4 trillion was laying siege to a rural community of barely 20,000 people. And so she says, this was war, and it had only just begun. Now, here's the silver lining through all of this. As chaotic as it might sound, and as impossible as it may be to believe that there's any silver lining here whatsoever, corporations, governments, do not hide their actions if they believe that what their actions are doing is justified and that most all of society would agree with it. If anything, they would shine a beacon on it to illustrate the fact that they're doing it. So the fact that Lazarus is coming through this town and they're basically destroying any and all methods of communication, both to and from the outside world, means they're trying to keep this hidden. And so what that means is the world would turn on them, or most people would turn on them, if they found out. And that is an important distinction that I want you to keep in the back of your head, because I'm gonna have a question for you here in a minute. And I wanna know what your thoughts are down in the comments when I ask it. And so what we end up doing here is we pick up in the here and now, 6 weeks later. And you've got Lois and Jimmy Olsen at the Smallville public broadcasting station, which ironically enough, right, despite the fact that they initially operated as what were basically resistance fighters in some way, right? Lois slowly turning against Lazarus Corp, Jimmy Olsen joining the Omega Men. At the end of the day, they kind of fall down into the path of what you and I would call reporters. And that's exactly what they're doing, right? They're literally broadcasting on a pirate signal out to the world that Lazarus Corp has built a concentration camp in the middle of the heartland where they're illegally detaining citizens without cause or due process. And no one seems to have noticed or bothered to care. And she says the Lazarus Corporation, as directed by the CEO, Ra's al Ghul, is applying the full force of its resources towards strangling this community. Smallville would have been wiped from the earth weeks ago if not for the efforts of one man. They call him Superman. The things he can do are impossible to believe unless you've seen them, and we have. Every word of this packet is true and verifiable. There are reports and photographs from the world's most volatile war zone right here in the Sunflower State. And so that's where Saul chimes in and is like, Lazarus has picked up on your signal and Lazarus is coming for you. So at that point, Jimmy's just like, we have to go. And Lois kind of finishes out this message, right? If anyone can hear us, we need you to spread the word before it's too late. This is Radio Smallville, broadcasting from occupied Kansas. Ad astra per aspera. Now, here's the question that I have for you guys. Who's gonna pick up on it? Who's gonna answer this call? Who's gonna respond to everything that's going on here? I want to know your all's thoughts down in the comments, right? I want to know who you think is going to show up. So what ends up happening is that Lois, of course, ends up taking off alongside Jimmy Olsen. And the problem is that in the middle of all this, they're quite literally being chased by Peacemaker mechs. And so they just ask, right, Saul, can you get them off our backs? And he just says, not without diverting vital resources from elsewhere. I suggest you ride faster. But he does do something that's really dope. And what's kind of cool about this, it's almost like an allegory to like the parting of the Red Sea, right? Where he says, I have temporarily opened a passageway, but I know that I must do what is necessary to protect the tunnels. And so what ends up happening is Lois says, no matter what happens to us, do not let those bastards inside, Saul. And this is an important thing, right? Because we kind of find out what they're referencing here. So what ends up happening is Lois asks the question, right? She says, Jimmy asked me the other day, when did I know? And then you jump to the other day when Jimmy asks her, when did you know? And it's kind of funny because he's actually talking about a little bit of his own past. And he says, before this, Miss Lane, would you believe I was the world's worst photographer? Which anybody who knows anything about Jimmy Olsen in the main DC universe will tell you, he's arguably one of the best photographers in the world, in the main DC universe. But he continues on. He says, my own mom used to call me Jimmy Three Thumbs. First time in my life that I ever took a decent photo was on one particular night. But Lois kind of cuts him off. And she was like, right, yeah, great. Look, Olsen, I got a story here to write. We don't have time to go down memory lane. We don't have time to talk about how your life used to be. And the here and now, we got to talk about what's happening at this moment. And she says, Al Ghul is moving to phase 3 of his occupation handbook. I should know. I aced that course in Lazarus Academy. How many K's in despotic oligarch? And Jimmy's just kind of like, not a one. But Jimmy Olsen asks her, he says, Miss Lane, when you were an agent of Lazarus, when did you first know? When did you realize you were on the wrong side? And she just kind of says, the exact same moment that you did, I'm guessing. And that's the influence and the power of Superman. It's one of these great things that Jason Aaron kind of builds on here, right? Like, it's one of the coolest things that Jeff Johns was talking about during Doomsday Clock when Superman met Dr. Manhattan and the two of them almost fought. It was Dr. Manhattan recognizing that across the multiverse, Superman is almost kind of like this just lone figure of improving the world, right? This beacon that everybody looks up to. And that's kind of what Jason is building on here. That, yeah, absolute Superman is not clean, and he's not fluid in his movements, and he's not pristine and sparkly with a nickel slick smile, right? He's not like the Superman that we know, where he's like your granddad's Superman, and he just got it all figured out. That experience isn't there. But the fact is, once Superman, seemingly regardless of what universe he's in, steps into the role of, I will lead the world into a better place, and I will stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves, he immediately is followed by people. People just latch on to the ideology, and it's awesome that Jason Aaron's doing that. It's awesome that he's keeping that. And so Lois Lane continues on here. She says, Jimmy Olsen and I come from two different worlds, from opposite ends of every conceivable spectrum. Me with Lazarus, him with the Omega Men. But the one thing that we have in common is that we've always had this gnawing sense that something was wrong, that everything was wrong. Now, this is Lois hitting on Darkseid, is what she's hitting on, right? One of the things to keep in mind, and it's one of the things that we saw with Darkseid originally formed the absolute universe. This universe wasn't always like this. It's one of the things to remember, and it's a very easy thing to skip over. The universe wasn't always this way, right? One of the things that Mr. Terrific hit on was that this universe was still forming, it was still developing, but then suddenly when Darkseid had disappeared, they realized this universe was changing. So Darkseid corrupted this place, and that's the feeling that they're hitting on when they say, everything's wrong, something's wrong, things aren't right, this is not how it's supposed to be. Because if the universe had always been this way, then there would be no feeling that something's off and that everything's wrong, because there wouldn't have ever been an instance where things had been different. And so that's where you have Lois continuing on. She says, for years, it was like an itch that we couldn't scratch, this feeling that someone had taken the game board of our lives and shaken it like a madman until all the pieces went skittering in the wrong direction. There were plenty of times we thought we were crazy, moments of despair when we figured we'd always be lost and miserable, always searching, when we wondered if we even wanted to go on. And then one day, out of the blue, everything changed. The day I met Superman, that was when I knew. I didn't have the first clue who he was or where he came from, but somehow I could tell. If there was one bright side in this leaky, sloshing bucket of a world, it was his, and I damn sure had to be on it. So again, the nature of Superman, that once he steps into the role of a good guy, everything around him changes. And seemingly, it's the one thing that Darkseid cannot account for when he created the absolute universe. He could not account for the fact that Superman and what he represents can never truly be defeated or even really overcome. And I imagine that concept is going to play a major role throughout DCKO when the absolute universe fights the main DC universe, when these two realities meet each other. And so what you end up doing is you jump back to 5 weeks ago, and Superman has basically brought everybody down below Smallville, right? Just all these citizens. And he says, we're a half mile down below the old salt mines, deeper than Lazarus munitions can reach. And he says, I dug the tunnels myself, added some wells, and rigged limited electricity, which is solar powered. Saul is my guardian, a being made of living sunstone crystals, and he will serve as fortification and security. I know mines from my time on Krypton, and where he initially kind of breaks down, right, talking about the ending of his world, he says, you will be safe here, I promise. And so one of these individuals steps forward, and he just says, thank you, Superman. And then, of course, somebody else just kind of like, what did he say? I couldn't hear a word of that. Which kind of makes you wonder the question, right? When you have like some grandiose battle scene where the king's in front and like delivering this passionate message to the people in front. What about the guys who are like 300 rows back, right? Like the final ride of the Rohirrim in like the Return of the King. The guys all the way in the back, how could they have possibly heard what Theoden was saying, right? I mean, it's just one of those things, right? I don't know. Maybe you guys think about it, maybe you don't. But still, right, Superman kind of says, they stare at me like I have 3 heads, like I'm muttering gibberish when I speak more of their languages than they do. And he says, I've walked this planet in a way no human ever has, but I will never be one of them. And he says, Lois Lane is different, scarier. The way she looks at me, from her, I cannot seem to hide. And that's an important distinction, because this is the blossoming relationship between the two. This is how Jason Aaron builds up the love interest between Superman and Lois. No matter what he does, no matter where he goes, no matter how hard he hides, when she sees him, she sees all of him. There's no part of himself that he can hide from her. Now, some of it's just the piercing gaze of a woman like Lois Lane who's destined to be a world-famous reporter, no matter what universe she's in. But this is also just because of the fact that it's Lois Lane and it's Superman, the 1-2 punch of comic book love interests, right? I mean, they are the OG couple. Superman is Superman, and Lois Lane is the first lady of comics. So it's one of these cool things, right, where Jason Aaron's kind of building on this bit of a mythos here. But Superman just kind of tells her, Lazarus is at the treatment plant, attempting to poison Smallville's water. We have to get to work, Lois. So notice this. Lazarus Corp is committing pretty much every international war crime that a group could commit, right? Poisoning natural resources, attacking innocent people, rounding them up, throwing them in concentration camps for brainwashing or torture. That's clearly a violation of the Geneva Conventions, assuming they even exist in this reality. But at the end of the day, when you're a multi-trillion-dollar multinational company, you don't really care. You can just pay enough to make it all go away. But that's where Lois says, we both do, right? The world has to be told what's happening here. Jimmy and I are working on that. But part of that story will have to be about you. And she says, you've been living in the shadows for years now. After this, there will be no more hiding. I need to know that you are ready for that. Are you prepared to show the world who you are? Because that is a true statement. He's been hiding and hiding this entire time. But once all this gets out, the only way to make people believe that it's true is to show them Superman and to show the world what he can do and what he stands for, and to show what Lazarus Corp is doing here, to turn the tide, to right the ship. But he has to be ready. He cannot hide anymore, because if he does, people will come for him. And so what ends up happening is he initially kind of toys with the idea that he doesn't know, he doesn't really even know who he is, that there's a guy who steps forward and he says, Superman, right, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to talk to you. My name is Jed Cochran. I was the mail carrier for the Kents when you first came here, and there's no easy way to say this. I was the one who reported you to Lazarus. Now, of course, Superman kills the guy immediately. That's not true. I don't know why I said that. Instead, he lets the guy speak his piece, right? Where Jed says, I believed what Lazarus told us, that there were enemies among us. I thought I was doing the right thing, that I was protecting my community. But now, here we are, here you are, and my family would be dead if it wasn't for what you've done here, Superman. I don't know what to say other than I was wrong and I am sorry and thank you. And Superman just stares at him, right, with daggers for eyes, right? And ultimately, Jed just walks away, right? That Lois is like, Cal, like, are you gonna, kind of coaching him in that direction? And Jed's just kind of like, it's okay, right? I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to say my piece. And that's the thing, is Superman is wrestling with these feelings, right? Tear his arm off, melt the skin from his bones, hurl him into the sun. But ultimately, he doesn't do any of that. He just walks up to him and he says, you have a sharp eye, Jed. We need that. We could use you on guard duty. And they go to shake hands. And Superman's like telling himself, right, do not crush this man's hand. Do not destroy Jed, or otherwise you will lose the trust of everybody here like that. And so at the end of the day, Superman just says, right, these people are all your family now. Help me protect them. And Jed just says, I will, Superman. But notice this, right? Even in the face of that, which I don't know if I would go so far as to say bygones being bygones, he says, this is not my home. I have no home. I fight for strangers who fear me. And he says, I am nothing, and no one. And he just tells Lois, right, tell people whatever you want, Lois, it doesn't matter. So why focus so much on the negative, right? Like a dude stepped forward in the face of all these hundreds, if not potentially thousands of people in Smallville who were standing there, who were on his side, who love Superman and care about him. Why hyper focus on the one guy who betrayed him? Well, number one, it is the one guy who betrayed him, right? It was a pretty significant betrayal. And the second reason is because negativity bias. Once upon a time, two cavemen were walking along a path and they both heard a rustling in the bushes, and the one who ran away lived longer than the one who went to go investigate. And ever since then, the human race has had its eye out for any negative thing out there that could potentially be a threat. And seemingly that applies universally to any race that experiences evolution, ultimately developing sentience. Negativity bias is a universal thing. Now, the kicker about this is that we as human beings, and by extension Superman, we have sentience. We can determine the world around us, so we can just choose to ignore things. And so Superman had a choice here, right? He had a choice to simply step forward and to say, okay, I don't necessarily know who I am, but I am surrounded by people who are at least helping me define that identity. But instead, he retreats back into the part of himself that doesn't trust humanity, that doesn't really know who he is or where he's going. And so seemingly, he's not moving in the direction of the Superman that we know and love, which is why I say, I cannot wait until these two meet, because I think when that happens, that's when absolute Superman will become the Superman that we know and love. And so what ends up happening here is you switch over to Ra's and Talia al Ghul. And Talia just tells him, or at least asks him, right? She says, you said that we had a plan to neutralize that cape of his. It doesn't look very neutralized to me, because there is a giant wall blocking their ability to access Smallville. It's quite literally a fortress of solitude around the town. And that's where Ross just says, patience, daughter, right? All will be ready soon. And that's where Talia asks, right? Where's Brainiac? We need more of his kryptonite if we're going to bring the alien to his knees. But that's where Ross just says, Brainiac is otherwise occupied, and I have my own plans for the remaining kryptonite. We will have to employ other means of strengthening our army. And so he tells Talia, fetch your God box. And he says, it's time to let the hand of the Omega guide the way. Of course, as we know from the entirety of DCKO, the Absolute Universe, the Omega is Darkseid. And so what you do is you switch over to Absolute Superman, right? And he says, the mechs keep getting stronger, infused with the power of Talia's mysterious father box. Behind every punch is a growling whisper that scorches my ears. Lazarus has been seeding storm clouds for weeks, smothering the sun. Its forces raid Smallville in waves at all hours. Lazarus does not sleep. So neither do I. And so what ends up happening is when he fights off against some of these peacemakers, that he could leave them there to burn alive in their mech suits. Instead, of course, he uses his frost breath. He basically puts out the fires, and then he tells them, right, like, you guys are attacking innocent people. And I get that maybe you're just following orders, right? Maybe you just don't know any better. But the reality here is you do know better, and following orders is an excuse. The Ross's family pig farm is 3 miles that way. When I come by here in an hour, I'd better see you sitting in that slop, thinking about what you've done. Now go. Now, of course, this is one of those Dennis from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia implied scenarios, right? The implied scenario is, if I do not see you sitting in that slop, thinking about what you've done, then I will undo saving your life. Right? That seems to be the implication, right? And so that's where he kind of describes his current state. And he says, eyes feel like gaping wounds, lungs full of razor blades. I have to leap above the clouds, bask in the sunlight, but there are houses burning on Langmore Street, warships on the Arkansas. I need to move the Robinsons' cows to a safer pasture. So even if his attitude towards Smallville and seemingly people is not that of Superman in terms of how he relates to them, the desire to save everyone he can is. And that's where Lois walks up to him, right? And she says, you can't keep this up, right? You're exhausted. Anyone can see that. You're protecting an entire town day and night, even as Superman has his limits, right? And he asks her, has anyone heard them yet, Lois? Your broadcasts, your stories. Is anyone coming? And she just says, I don't know. Right? No, I guess, at least not yet. And then Superman says, well, then we'll both keep doing what we have to do, won't we? And that's where Lois kind of pleads with him, right? And she says, the world will know about Smallville, no matter what it takes. They will know about you. It's your story that will change everything. I believe that, and I know it, because it changed me. The problem is, in the midst of all of this, Saul chimes in and says, Cal, something is wrong with me. And he says, I've been infiltrated. I should have noticed. And he just says, Cal, I am so sorry. Why? Because Saul has been corrupted by Brainiac. And Brainiac literally tells him, Saul is gone, Superman. No more will you have him whining in your ear, holding you back. You're free now. And like Jimmy Olsen doesn't know what's going on, but Lois picks up on it immediately. And she's like, Saul's protecting the people underground. Brainiac has Saul. Brainiac's gonna kill them all. And so she's like, we have to get the people out of the tunnels now. And Brainiac's just like, I think not, Miss Lane. And then like immediately brings down the walls protecting Smallville and goes into the tunnels. And Superman initially tries to attack Brainiac, but Brainiac escapes by then. And Superman just says, this world will never trust me. I'll always be an other to these people. It doesn't matter what I tell them. And Lois says, if he would just tell us who he is and stop hiding, people would be amazed. They would see him for the hero he is. So he doesn't believe in himself, but she believes in him. And Superman just says, I've told them too much. Should never have mentioned Krypton. I should have stayed hidden. Smallville is suffering because I was careless, because I showed the world something I cared about. Never do that again. And then Lois muses to herself. What does he care about? Who is he? Does he even know? How do I help him to know? And it's just kind of back and forth and back and forth. She believes in him. If only absolute Superman would show himself to the world and show the world what it could be, technologically, morally, he could lead it into a better future. But he doesn't believe in the world because of a few things that he's seen. But Lois has seen way more than he has, and she believes in the world. So the fact that he doesn't is really more of a failing on absolute Superman's part, because he says this world needs a Superman more than anything, but that is not me. And so that's where Talia literally tells all the attackers, hold your fire. Ra's al Ghul shows up and he says, our games are at an end, boy. The final judgment has come. Before this day is through, mark my words, you will kneel before Ra's al Ghul in the blood of those you love and beg to be my son, because he's standing there with a green kryptonite sword, and it looks amazing. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Absolute Superman just keeps getting better and better and better. Every issue is better than the last. But yeah, we're going to bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, and I will catch you all later. Peace.